Hi there, my name is Justin Hibbard and welcome to Politics in Plain English. Thanks so much for tuning in. At Politics in Plain English, I always begin with a question. And today's question is this: can the Vice President invoke the 25th Amendment to oust the President? Before I get to that question, if you're new to Politics in Plain English, what I do is take complex political ideas and current events and break them down so they're easy to understand and digest in an explanation that's 18 minutes or less. I take out the hyper emotion and spin, try to stick with data and facts, presenting all sides fairly. My goal is that you become an informed voter because I believe that an informed voter is the most powerful voter and the ideal of our democracy. If you haven't done so, would you do me a huge favor and subscribe? You can subscribe to the Politics in Plain English podcast wherever you get your podcasts. I also do a video of these podcasts, which you can find on my YouTube channel, which is just Justin R. Hibbard. And that's my handle as well on Facebook and Twitter. Just search Justin R. Hibbard and you can follow me there as well. Lastly, I try and do a podcast episode once each week, but I do a lot more writing. And if you'd like to get my articles in your inbox, you can subscribe at justinrhibbard.substack.com. Thanks so much for doing that. Now, let's get back to our question at hand. Can the Vice President invoke the 25th Amendment to oust the President? First, let's start with a little bit of context. At the time of this recording, Donald Trump's supporters attempted a coup or riot or an insurrection of sorts by storming the Capitol building while Congress was certifying the Electoral College's votes. And even though there's less than 2 weeks left of President Trump's time in the White House, a number of congressional leaders from both sides of the aisle have called for his removal. There are really only two nonviolent and constitutional ways you can remove a sitting president from office. One is impeachment, and the second is exercising what's called the 25th Amendment. Democratic leaders have called on Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove Donald Trump from the presidency. In doing so, Mike Pence would become president for the remainder of the term, which at this point is less than 2 weeks. So let's start with understanding what the 25th Amendment says. Basically, the 25th Amendment of the Constitution provides a succession plan in the event that the president or the vice president, they're no longer able to serve. Section 1 just tells us that if the president dies or is removed from office, the vice president becomes the president. Section 2 explains that if there is no vice president, then the president gets to appoint one with the approval of both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and that is with a majority vote. Section 3 has to deal with a president giving the vice president temporary control over the presidency. For example, if the president undergoes a medical procedure where he's put under, and typically he'll give temporary power to the vice president. Now, Section 4, that's the section we'll focus on in this episode, because that provides the details of how the vice president can take control of the presidency should he and a group of others feel that the president is no longer able to carry out his duties. The 25th Amendment was ratified in 1967 as a response to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Before then, each administration made its own succession plans. For example, in 1919, President Woodrow Wilson had a massive stroke and was incapacitated. When the cabinet suggested that the vice president take over, Wilson's wife Edith conspired with the doctors to keep his condition a secret, leaving the country without a capable leader. In another example, President Eisenhower suffered from a number of heart problems and he even had a mild stroke. He wrote a private letter to his vice president, which was Richard Nixon, with instructions that Nixon should take over if he became incapacitated. So what the 25th Amendment does is creates a clear and standard succession plan of what would happen if the president or vice president no longer is able to serve. Now, let's go back to the question: can the vice president invoke the 25th Amendment to oust the president? And yes, the answer is yes, but it has never happened before. So if it were to happen, how would the vice president do it? Well, what Section 4 explains is that the vice president and the majority of the president's cabinet would need to agree to remove the president from his position of authority. They would then submit the notice to the leaders of the Senate and House of Representatives that the president is being removed and that the vice president is taken over. There are currently 21 cabinet positions, which include positions like the Secretaries of State, Defense, Treasury, the Interior, Education, etc. So in this case, the Vice President would need to convince 11 of them to sign off on removing the President from office. The President's cabinet is generally loyal to the President, so this is a pretty strong check on the Vice President's power. For example, if the Vice President was just trying to oust the President in a power play attempt, he'd need to confer with members of the cabinet, and they'd have to keep it quiet. If the President found out that a cabinet member was conspiring to kick him out of office, the President could fire that cabinet member on the spot with no questions asked. So the bottom line is that this would have to be used in the most dire of circumstances. Unfortunately, at the time of this recording, it seems like we may have reached that point. On January 6, 2021, President Donald Trump convened a march in Washington to protest the 2020 election, which he lost to Joe Biden. He, along with his son Donald Trump Jr. and his lawyer Rudy Giuliani, used violent rhetoric and told the crowd to march down to Capitol Hill. And that's when things turned from a protest to a riot as Trump supporters stormed into the Capitol, disrupting Congress's session, breaking windows, stealing equipment, and ending the lives of 5 people, including a federal police officer. Immediately, there were calls from Democrats and even a couple of Republicans for the president to resign or the vice president to invoke the 25th Amendment. On Friday, January 8th, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, said that if the vice president wouldn't or couldn't invoke the 25th Amendment, the House of Representatives would file articles of impeachment against the president, and that's what they did on Monday, January 11th. As a response to the mayhem on January 6th, 2 cabinet members, Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation, and Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, resigned from their positions. The reasons they gave for stepping down were the lawlessness on Capitol Hill. Just the other day, Acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, also resigned. Now, it's possible these people stepped down so that they wouldn't be forced to make a decision in regards to the 25th Amendment. After all, it's kind of a lose-lose situation. If you choose to oust the president, then you'll be hated by all the president's loyal followers. If you choose to block the attempt of invoking the 25th Amendment, then you'll be chastised by the majority of people that support the president's exit. But with 2 and now 3 cabinet members now gone, this brings up another question. Would the vice president now only have to get 9 or 10 on board instead of the 11? Well, I think now we're treading on uncharted territory. Technically, there's still 21 executive offices, and likely the deputy secretaries will become the acting secretaries. But the bottom line is that these rules are not spelled out in the Constitution, so it's likely that they would be challenged in a court if, say, the vice president got 9 or 10 votes, but not the full 11. However, the 25th Amendment spells out another option for the vice president to remove the president. The text reads, the vice president and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive department, which we understand to be the cabinet, or of such other body as Congress may by law provide. In other words, Congress can pass a law which designates a group of people that can confer with the vice president in removing the sitting president instead of the president's cabinet. In early October 2020, a month before the election, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi introduced legislation that would create a bipartisan commission to determine a sitting president's ability to carry out the duties of his office. This is exactly the type of alternate body that is allowed for in the 25th Amendment. Pelosi's plan for the commission was that it would be made up of 17 Republicans and Democrats that are former medical experts or former high-ranking members of the executive branch. When asked if this was specifically because of Donald Trump, she said, quote, "This is not about President Trump. He will face the judgment of the voters, but he shows the need for us to create a process for future presidents. This legislation applies to future presidents, but we are reminded of the necessity of action by the health of the current president." However, in order for legislation to become a law, it would need both the House and the Senate's majority approval as well as the president's signature, unless both the House and the Senate have a veto-proof majority. So as of now, this law or legislation hasn't become law. It hasn't come to fruition. And so this can't be used to remove President Trump from office. But I would predict that once President-elect Joe Biden is in office and the Democrats have a majority in both the House and the Senate, I think they may pass this legislation. If you think about it, removing the president through a bipartisan commission is a lot easier than removing him from a cabinet filled with people that are his subordinates. Keep in mind that the Constitution does have safeguards in place should it become necessary to remove the president, but it's not easy, nor is it supposed to be easy. The president is elected by the will of the people, and in a democracy, the situation should be dire to remove that president. Now, there is another way to remove the president, and that's through impeachment, and that's a topic for next time. Thanks for taking the time to tune into Politics in Plain English. If you liked what you heard, could you do me a huge favor and subscribe and maybe even give it a 5-star rating? You can find Politics in Plain English on your favorite podcast provider. The video cast is on my YouTube channel, Justin R. Hibbard. You can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Hey, it's all the same handle, Justin R. Hibbard. And lastly, I'll try and do a podcast and vodcast once each week, but I do a lot more writing throughout the week. You can subscribe and get my latest article in your inbox at justinrhibbard.substack.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Justin Hibbard, and this is Politics in Plain English.